on waves lapping against rocky shores. The camera moves slowly across Deer Island's weathered coastline, where morning joggers trace familiar paths along the harbor. This is Boston, a city that has seen everything, endured everything, forgotten nothing. But on this June morning in 2015, the harbor holds a secret it cannot keep. A small bundle wrapped in zebra print blanket floats among the debris, silent and still. The discovery will shatter the quiet of a neighborhood, ignite the conscience of a nation, and reveal how easily a child can vanish without anyone noticing she was ever there. This is the story of Bella Bond, known for months only as Baby Doe, and the relentless pursuit of truth that brought her home. It is a story of memory, loss, and the weight of secrets that time cannot wash away. Some silences echo louder than screams. Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The sun rises over Boston Harbor, casting long shadows across Deer Island's walking trail. Maria Valdez, 42, a hospital administrator with kind eyes and weathered hands, moves at her usual morning pace. Her breath forms small clouds in the cool air as her sneakers find their rhythm on the familiar path. She has walked this route for 3 years, ever since her divorce. The solitude helps her think, helps her prepare for 12-hour shifts, managing crises she can control. But this morning, something catches her peripheral vision, a dark shape bobbing against the rocks below. Maria slows, squinting against the glare. At first, she thinks it might be debris from the harbor, old clothing, perhaps a bag of trash carried by the tide. Boston's harbor has carried stranger things. But as she moves closer to the water's edge, her breath catches. The bundle is small, too small, wrapped in what appears to be a zebra print blanket, secured with a heavy-duty trash bag. Maria's medical training kicks in even as her heart begins to race. She recognizes the shape, the proportions. This is not debris. Her hands shake as she pulls out her phone, fingers fumbling with the emergency number she has dialed countless times in her professional life. But this call is different. This call will change everything. 911. What's your emergency? I'm at Deer Island, on the walking path, I think. I think I found a child's body in the water. The words hang in the morning air, like a prayer she wishes she could take back. But there is no unknowing what she has seen. No unmaking this discovery that will haunt Boston for months to come. Detective Sarah Mason, 38, has worked enough water recoveries to know the harbor's moods. 20 minutes after Maria's call, she stands on the state police boat, watching recovery divers prepare for what no one wants to find. The zebra print blanket moves gently in the shallow water, incongruously cheerful against the gray rocks. Detective Mason has seen this before, the jarring contrast between childhood innocence and unthinkable tragedy. The bright patterns that once brought comfort now marking the scene of loss. Victim appears to be a young child, possibly female, approximately 2 to 3 years old. She speaks into her radio, her voice steady despite the weight in her chest. No obvious signs of trauma from this distance. We're bringing her up now. Diver Michael Roberts surfaces slowly, cradling the small form with the reverence reserved for the most precious cargo. The blanket drips harbor water, but beneath it, the child appears almost peaceful, as if sleeping rather than lost. She's wearing polka dot leggings, Roberts reports quietly. White shirt, looks like she's been in the water maybe 12 hours. Possibly less. He pauses, removing his mask. She's just a baby, Sarah, Detective Mason nods, her throat tight. In 15 years of law enforcement, she has learned to compartmentalize, to separate the human tragedy from the investigative necessity. But some cases breach those careful walls, and she already knows this will be one of them. As they transfer the small body to the coroner's boat, Mason notices something that will stay with her for months. The child's hair is still damp with seawater, but her face looks clean, almost serene. Whatever happened to her, she appears to have been cared for, loved. Someone dressed her carefully in those polka dot leggings. Someone who is now missing from the world. Dr. Elizabeth Carey has performed thousands of autopsies in her 20-year career, but examining children never becomes routine. She approaches the small form on the metal table with the same methodical care she brings to every case, knowing that each detail could provide answers for a family somewhere. But this child has no family calling the morgue, no frantic parents demanding answers. She is, in the most fundamental sense, unknown. Female child, approximately 24 to 30 months old. Dr. Carey dictates to her assistant. Height 31 inches, weight approximately 30 pounds. Well-nourished. No obvious signs of abuse or neglect. Clothing appears recently washed. The examination reveals more questions than answers. No fractures, no bruising, no clear evidence of trauma. The child appears healthy, cared for, loved, making her presence in Boston Harbor all the more mystifying. No water in the lungs, Dr. Carey notes. pausing over this crucial finding. Death occurred prior to submersion. She looks up at Detective Mason, who has remained throughout the examination. This child was already deceased when she entered the water. The implication hangs heavy in the sterile air. This was not an accidental drowning. Someone placed this child in the harbor, wrapped carefully in her zebra blanket like a final gift. Cause of death? Mason asks, though she suspects the answer. Undetermined at this time. Could be suffocation, could be blunt force trauma that left no visible marks. We'll need toxicology results, though those will take weeks. Dr. Carey's voice carries the frustration of incomplete answers. What I can tell you is that someone took care to present this child peacefully. The positioning, the blanket, this wasn't disposal. This was almost ceremonial. Mason nods, making notes she knows will fill many sleepless nights. Ceremonial disposal suggests someone who cared about this child, someone who couldn't bear to see her treated like refuse. But it also suggests someone who knew her death would raise questions they couldn't answer. The conference room fills with the quiet urgency that surrounds high-profile cases. Captain Robert Torres, a 25-year veteran with silver hair and tired eyes, addresses the assembled team of detectives, forensic specialists, and media relations officers. We're calling her Deer Island Jane Doe until we can establish identity, he announces, though everyone in the room knows this name will never stick. The media has already begun calling her Baby Doe, and the public has embraced the moniker with the fierce protectiveness Boston reserves for its most vulnerable. Forensic specialist James Wong spreads photographs across the conference table: the zebra blanket, the polka dot leggings, the small white shirt. Each item has been cataloged, tested, analyzed for any trace that might lead them home. DNA processing is underway, Wong reports. We're also conducting isotope analysis on hair and tooth samples to determine where she might have spent her early life. Pollen analysis of the blanket might tell us where she was kept before disposal. Detective Mason adds her preliminary findings. No reports of missing children matching her description in Massachusetts. We're expanding the search to neighboring states, but so far nothing. It's as if she never existed in any official capacity. The silence that follows is heavy with implication. A child who never existed officially suggests. A child who lived outside normal systems. No pediatrician visits. No daycare enrollment. No extended family checking in. It suggests isolation, secrecy, a life lived in the margins. We're looking at possible undocumented families, off-the-grid communities, situations where a child might not interact with traditional institutions, Captain Torres explains. But we're also considering the possibility that someone actively concealed her existence. Media Relations Officer Janet Brooks reviews the public information strategy. We'll release the forensic reconstruction as soon as it's complete. The response will be significant cases involving children always are. We need to be prepared for thousands of tips. As the meeting disperses, Detective Mason remains behind, studying the photographs. Something about the careful positioning, the pristine condition of the clothing, bothers her. This child was loved, protected, cared for until the very end. But love alone doesn't explain how she ended up in Boston Harbor without anyone reporting her missing. Forensic artist Christy Andrews has reconstructed the faces of hundreds of unidentified victims, but working with children requires a different kind of precision. Using measurements from the medical examiner and specialized software, she has spent days crafting a digital face that she hopes will bring this unknown child home. The image on her computer screen shows a beautiful little girl with brown hair and dark eyes, a slight smile that speaks of mischief and joy. Andrews has given her life again, transforming measurements and medical data into something recognizably human. She looks like she should be playing in someone's backyard, Andrews murmurs to her colleague. Like she should be safe in someone's arms. The reconstruction process always affects her, but children hit differently. They represent possibility cut short, futures that will never unfold. Within hours of the image's release, the response is overwhelming. The National Center's tip line receives hundreds of calls. Social media explodes with shares, comments, and desperate pleas for information. The hashtag number BabyDoe trends nationally within 6 hours. But despite the massive public response, no one calls to claim her. No frantic parent recognizes their missing daughter. No relative comes forward with a name. The beautiful face that was meant to bring her home instead highlights how completely she has been erased from the world. Detective Mason watches the tip line reports with growing concern. 48 hours and no legitimate identification, she tells Captain Torres. Either she's from very far away, or someone worked very hard to keep her invisible. Or both, Torres replies grimly. Keep processing the tips. Someone out there knows who she is. Someone out there is missing her, even if they can't or won't come forward. 84 billboards now display Baby Doe's reconstructed face across Massachusetts highways. Her image looks down from electronic signs, bus stops, and subway platforms. The Massachusetts State Police have launched the largest identification effort in the state's history. In Lawrence, Massachusetts, Elena Rodriguez pauses while loading groceries into her car. The billboard across the street shows a face that tugs at something deep in her memory. She stares for long minutes, trying to place where she might have seen this child. "Mommy, hurry up," her own daughter calls from the back seat, and Elena shakes her head, dismissing the feeling. There are thousands of children in Lawrence, and this one could be any of them. But across the city, others are having similar moments of recognition. A convenience store clerk thinks the face looks familiar but can't place it. A bus driver remembers a woman with a child who matched this description, but that was months ago, and memories blur. In Dorchester, apartment 2D, Rachel Bond, 40, catches a glimpse of the billboard from her kitchen window and quickly turns away. She has been turning away from a lot of things lately: news reports, missing person flyers, the persistent questions from her neighbor about her daughter Bella's whereabouts. She's with her father, Rochelle tells people who ask, the lie coming easier each time. She's fine. She's safe. But the words feel hollow even as she speaks them, and the face on the billboard makes her stomach turn in ways she can't quite name. Her boyfriend, Michael McCarthy, 35, watches her reaction from the couch. His pale eyes, often distant and unfocused, show a flicker of something like concern. "You okay, babe?" "Fine," Rochelle whispers. But she isn't fine, and hasn't been fine since that terrible night in May when everything changed. The billboard face follows her into her dreams, where a small voice calls, "Mama," and she wakes to find only silence. Dr. Patricia Hayes, a marine scientist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, spreads current charts across her desk, with the methodical precision of someone who understands water the way others understand roads. She has been asked to determine where Baby Doe entered Boston Harbor, and the answer troubles her. Based on tidal patterns and current flow, she couldn't have drifted far. Dr. Hayes explains to Detective Mason over a secure video call. The location where she was found indicates disposal within a quarter-mile radius, probably from one of the South Boston terminals or nearby shoreline access points. She highlights specific areas on the digital map. The harbor islands create eddies that would trap floating objects. If she had been in the water for more than 18 hours, she would have been carried much farther out, or into different sections of the harbor. Detective Mason studies the highlighted zones. So whoever disposed of her had to know this area well enough to access it at night, probably by vehicle. Most likely, Dr. Hayes confirms. And the careful wrapping suggests they wanted her found relatively quickly, before decomposition could make identification impossible. This wasn't someone trying to hide a body permanently. This was someone who couldn't bear the alternative, but also couldn't face the consequences of reporting her death. The analysis narrows their search area significantly, but it also raises new questions. Who in the greater Boston area had both access to these waterfront locations and reason to dispose of a child's body? The intersection of geography and motive creates a smaller but more troubling suspect pool. We're looking at dock workers, fishermen, anyone with regular harbor access, Mason tells her team that afternoon. But we're also looking at residents of South Boston and Dorchester who might know these access points from personal use. The net is closing, though no one realizes it yet. Margaret Sullivan, 67, has lived on the same Dorchester street for 43 years. She knows every family, every routine, every change in the neighborhood rhythm. Lately, something has been bothering her about the woman in apartment 2D. "I used to see that little girl all the time," she tells her neighbor Frank Torres over the fence that separates their tiny yards. "Bella, I think her name was. Sweet little thing, always waving from the window, but I haven't seen her in months." Frank nods thoughtfully. He's noticed too, though he's been hesitant to pry. The mother says she's with her father, but he trails off, unwilling to voice his concerns about a situation he doesn't fully understand. Margaret pulls the newspaper clipping from her pocket, the latest appeal for information about Baby Doe, with the forensic reconstruction prominently displayed. "Frank, doesn't this look like—" Frank studies the image, and his breath catches. The resemblance is unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same facial structure, the same age. "Margaret, we have to call this in. But what if we're wrong? What if the little girl really is with her father? Then we apologize and move on," Frank says quietly. "But what if we're right and we say nothing?" The weight of that possibility settles between them. Margaret looks again at the reconstruction, at the face of a child who deserves to have her name spoken, her existence acknowledged, her story told. "I'll call," she says simply. That baby deserves someone to speak for her. The phone call that Margaret Sullivan makes that afternoon will shatter months of silence. It will transform Baby Doe from an unknown victim into Bella Bond, a real child with a real name and a real story. But with identification comes investigation, And with investigation comes truth, truth that some people have killed to keep buried. The silence is ending. The pursuit is about to begin. The search warrant arrives with the dawn. Detective Mason leads a team of investigators up the worn stairs of 67 Dorchester Street, their footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. The building smells of decades of cooking, living, and struggle, the particular scent of working-class Boston tenements. Apartment 2D sits silent behind its scratched door, though neighbors peer through cracked open doors at the unusual activity. Mason raises her hand, pausing before knocking. Once they cross this threshold, everything changes for their investigation, for whoever lives behind this door, and for Baby Doe, who may finally have a name. Boston Police, search warrant. Mason's voice carries the authority of months of investigation, hundreds of tips, and the collective hope of a city that has embraced an unknown child as their own. Rochelle Bond opens the door wearing yesterday's clothes and tomorrow's worry. Her eyes are red-rimmed, her hands shake slightly, and when she sees the badge, something in her face simply collapses. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Mason. We'd like to ask you some questions about your daughter Bella." The name hangs in the air between them like a confession. Rochelle's mouth opens, closes, opens again. Behind her, Michael McCarthy appears, his pale eyes darting between the officers and his girlfriend. "She's with her father," Rochelle whispers automatically, but the words lack conviction now. "She's been with her father since May. Ma'am, we need to come in. We have some pictures we'd like to show you." The apartment tells its own story. Toys pushed into corners, a high chair folded against the wall, children's books stacked beside the television. But dust has settled on everything, and the silence feels profound. This is a home where a child lived, but no child lives anymore. Detective Mason places the forensic reconstruction on the coffee table. Rochelle looks at it for exactly 3 seconds before turning away, her hand flying to her mouth. That's not my Bella," she says, but her voice breaks on the lie. "Ma'am, where is Bella right now?" And finally, after months of silence, after billboards and tip lines and a city's worth of searching, Rochelle Bond begins to tell the truth. The recording equipment captures every word, but some truths are almost too terrible to preserve. Rochelle sits across from Detective Mason and DA Daniel Conley, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that has long since grown cold. "She was such a good baby," Rochelle begins, and for a moment her voice carries the warmth of genuine memory. "She loved to dance, loved music. She would spin around the living room until she got dizzy and fell down laughing." The past tense hangs heavy in the room. Detective Mason waits, letting the silence stretch until Rochelle fills it with truth. Michael said she was evil. He said she was a demon, that she was possessed." Rochelle's voice drops to almost a whisper. "He'd been doing more drugs, saying crazy things, but I never thought he would. I never thought he'd hurt her." "What happened the night Bella died, Rochelle?" The story comes out in fragments, like shards of broken glass. Bella crying in her bedroom, Michael's rage escalating, Rochelle hiding in the bathroom, too afraid of her boyfriend to protect her daughter, and then silence, the terrible silence that followed. "When I came out, she was so still." Michael said she wouldn't stop crying, that he just wanted her to be quiet. Rochelle's tears fall freely now. He put his hands over her face, and she just stopped. DA Conley leans forward. "What happened after Bella died?" Michael put her in the refrigerator, said we had to figure out what to do. "She was there for weeks." Rochelle's voice breaks completely. "My baby was in the refrigerator for weeks while I pretended everything was normal." The room falls silent, except for the hum of the recording equipment, and Rochelle's quiet sobbing. Detective Mason has heard many confessions, but the image of a child stored in a refrigerator while life continued around her hits with particular force. "How did she end up in the harbor?" Michael said we had to get rid of her. "We put her in a duffel bag with the zebra blanket. She loved that blanket." Michael drove to somewhere near the water and let her go. Rochelle looks up with desperate eyes, but I wrapped her carefully. I made sure she looked peaceful. I didn't want her to be scared. Michael McCarthy sits in the adjacent interview room, his pale eyes fixed on the table between him and Detective Carlos Rivera. Unlike Rochelle's emotional breakdown, McCarthy's demeanor remains eerily calm, almost detached. "Rochelle's telling you stories," he says flatly when confronted with her confession. "That woman's crazy, always making things up. Bella's with her father, like we always said." Detective Rivera slides the forensic reconstruction across the table. "This is the child found in Boston Harbor in June. Rochelle identified her as Bella." McCarthy glances at the image with no visible reaction. "Don't know anything about that. Never seen that kid before." "Michael, we have evidence. We found traces in the refrigerator, fibers that match the blanket. Your girlfriend is cooperating fully." For the first time, something flickers across McCarthy's face: anger, perhaps, or calculation. "Rochelle's a drug addict and a liar. You can't believe anything she says." "Did you call Bella Bond a demon?" McCarthy's jaw tightens. That kid was wrong. Something wrong with her. She never stopped crying, never stopped making noise. Rochelle couldn't control her. So you controlled her? I want a lawyer. The words come out flat, final. McCarthy leans back in his chair and crosses his arms, retreating into the silence he should have maintained from the beginning. But the damage is done. His admission that something was wrong with Bella, combined with Rochelle's detailed confession, begins to paint a picture of the final night of a 2-year-old's life. The press conference room fills quickly. Word has leaked that Baby Doe has been identified, and the media response is immediate and intense. DA Daniel Conley adjusts his notes one final time before facing the cameras that will carry this news across the nation. After nearly 3 months of investigation, we can now confirm that the child found in Boston Harbor on June 25 has been identified as Bella Nevaeh Amoroso Bond, age 2, of Dorchester. The room erupts with questions, but Conley continues steadily. 2 arrests have been made in connection with Bella's death. Michael McCarthy, 35, has been charged with murder in the first degree. Rochelle Bond, 40, has been charged as an accessory after the fact. Can you tell us how she died? A reporter calls out. The investigation is ongoing, but we believe Bella was killed in her Dorchester home in late May, and her body was subsequently stored before being disposed of in Boston Harbor. Conley's voice remains professional, but his eyes reflect the weight of describing a child's final days. Across the city, people who have followed Baby Doe's story for months watch the press conference with a mixture of relief and heartbreak. She has a name now, but knowing her name makes her death feel more real, more personal. In Deer Island, Maria Valdez sits in her car during her lunch break, watching the press conference on her phone. Bella, the child she found, has a name, and somehow that makes both everything and nothing different. The hunt for Baby Doe is over. The pursuit of justice for Bella Bond has begun. 2 years later, the courtroom feels like a theater where tragedy will be performed for justice. Every seat is filled with reporters, victim advocates, curious members of the public who have followed Bella's story from the beginning. The weight of collective attention presses down on the proceedings like a physical force. Prosecutor John Pappas rises to address the jury, his voice carrying the accumulated weight of 24 months of investigation. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about the murder of a 2-year-old child named Bella Bond, killed by a man who called her a demon and disposed of like trash in Boston Harbor. Michael McCarthy sits at the defense table, his expression as flat and emotionless as it was during his interrogation. His attorney, Jonathan Shapiro, watches the jury carefully, already calculating how to counter the emotional weight of prosecuting a child killer. The evidence will show that Michael McCarthy suffocated Bella Bond during a fit of rage, then convinced her mother to help him dispose of her body. Pappas continues. For weeks, this child's remains were stored in a refrigerator while her killers collected welfare benefits in her name and told neighbors she was visiting relatives. In the gallery, Joe Amoroso, Bella's biological father, sits with his hands clenched in his lap. He barely knew his daughter had seen her only a handful of times, but her death has hollowed him out in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Defense attorney Shapiro begins his opening with a different narrative. Michael McCarthy is a troubled man with a history of mental illness and drug abuse, but the evidence will show that he did not kill Bella Bond. The person responsible for this child's death is the one person who had every opportunity and every reason to cover it up, her own mother. The strategy is immediately clear. Blame Rochelle, discredit her testimony, and create enough reasonable doubt to save McCarthy from a life sentence. It's a defense that transforms victim and accomplice alike into villains, leaving Bella's memory to fend for itself. Rochelle Bond is a drug addict, a welfare fraudster, and a pathological liar, Shapiro argues. She had months to fabricate this story, and she's telling you exactly what prosecutors want to hear in exchange for her own freedom. As the opening statements conclude, the enormity of what lies ahead settles over the courtroom. This trial will not just determine Michael McCarthy's fate, it will decide how Bella Bond's story ends, whether her death leads to justice or disappears into the legal system's appetite for reasonable doubt. The forensic evidence tells its own story, methodical and devastating. Dr. Elizabeth Carey takes the witness stand to describe her examination of Bella's remains, her professional demeanor masking the emotional weight of testifying about a child's death. The victim was a well-nourished child showing no signs of chronic abuse or neglect, Dr. Carey testifies. However, there were signs consistent with suffocation, petechial hemorrhages in the eyes and lungs that suggest obstruction of breathing. Prosecutor Pappas guides her through the timeline. Doctor, in your opinion, how long was the body refrigerated before disposal? Based on decomposition patterns and the preservation of tissue, I would estimate several weeks to possibly 2 months. Doctor, Carrie's voice remains steady, but her hands tremble slightly as she describes the scientific indicators of a child stored like meat. Forensic specialist James Wong follows with material evidence. Fiber. Analysis of the zebra blanket, DNA traces found in the refrigerator, pollen samples that place Bella's body in the Dorchester area before disposal. Each piece of evidence is small, but together, they form an unbreakable chain, connecting Bella's death to McCarthy and Bond. We found microscopic traces of human decomposition on the refrigerator seal, Wong testifies. DNA analysis confirmed these traces belonged to the victim. The defense's cross-examination focuses on contamination, chain of custody, and the possibility that evidence was planted or mishandled. But the forensic case is solid. Too many independent sources confirming the same timeline and location for reasonable doubt to take hold. Oceanographer Dr. Patricia Hayes explains the tidal analysis that led investigators to the South Boston disposal site. Her calm, scientific testimony contrasts sharply with the emotional weight of describing how a child's body moves through harbor currents. The body could not have traveled far from the point of disposal, she explains. Ocean currents in this area would have carried it to shore within hours, not days. This placement was deliberate and local. As the prosecution builds its case piece by piece, the jury sees a picture emerge. Bella Bond died in her Dorchester home, was stored for weeks while her killers maintained the fiction that she was visiting relatives, then carefully disposed of in Boston Harbor by someone familiar with the area. But evidence, no matter how compelling, cannot speak to motive or intent. For that, the prosecution will need Rochelle Bond herself. When Rochelle Bond takes the witness stand, the courtroom falls into complete silence. She has aged years in the months since her arrest, her hair thinner, her face drawn, her movements careful like someone who has learned that any sudden gesture might shatter what remains of her world. Please state your relationship to the victim, Prosecutor Pappas begins gently. Bella was my daughter. The words come out strong, clear, and for a moment, Rochelle's voice carries the pride and love that once defined her identity. She was my baby girl. Tell the jury about the night Bella died. Rochelle closes her eyes, gathering strength for a recitation she has practiced in therapy, in sleepless nights, in the endless loop of guilt that has become her existence. Michael had been using drugs all day, heroin, I think, and drinking. Bella was fussy, she had a cold, and she was cranky. Michael kept yelling at her to shut up. Where were you when this was happening? I went to the bathroom. I was scared of Michael when he got like that, and I thought if I just stayed away, he'd calm down. Her voice breaks. I should have protected her. I should have taken her and left, but I was scared. What happened when you came out of the bathroom? Bella was quiet. Too quiet. Michael was standing over her crib, and when I asked what happened, he said she wouldn't stop crying, so he made her stop. Rochelle's tears fall freely now. He had his hands. He showed me how he put his hands over her face until she stopped breathing. The courtroom absorbs this testimony like a physical blow. Several jurors look away, unable to maintain eye contact with a mother describing her child's murder. Why didn't you call 911? Michael said they'd blame me, that I'd go to prison for not protecting her. He said no one would believe it was an accident, that they'd take my other kids away. Rochelle looks directly at the jury. I was a coward. I was a horrible mother, and I was a coward. The cross-examination is brutal. Defense attorney Shapiro attacks every aspect of Rochelle's credibility, her drug use, her history of lying to authorities, her willingness to collect welfare benefits while her daughter's body was stored in her refrigerator. Miss Bond, isn't it true that you've lied to police before about domestic violence incidents? Yes. And you've lied to social services about your drug use? Yes. And you continued to cash welfare checks for Bella for months after you claimed she was dead? Yes. Each admission chips away at her credibility, but Rochelle's answers remain consistent, her core story unchanged, despite the relentless attack. As Rochelle steps down from the witness stand, the trial's central question crystallizes. Can a confessed accomplice, a admitted liar, a woman who failed to protect her own child, still be believed when she points to the real killer? Defense attorney Jonathan Shapiro builds his case like a house of mirrors. Every piece of evidence the prosecution presented gets reflected, distorted, reframed to point somewhere else. His strategy is not to prove Michael McCarthy's innocence, but to make guilt impossible to prove beyond reasonable doubt. Harold Mitchell, a forensic psychiatrist, testifies about McCarthy's mental health history. Mr. McCarthy has documented paranoid schizophrenia, exacerbated by chronic substance abuse. He frequently experiences delusions, and has difficulty distinguishing reality from hallucination. In your opinion, would someone in Mr. McCarthy's mental state be capable of the complex planning required to store and dispose of a body? It's highly unlikely. The methodical nature of the concealment and disposal suggests someone with clearer cognitive function and stronger organizational skills. Shapiro introduces alternate theories. Perhaps Bella died accidentally, and Rochelle, panicking, created the murder narrative to deflect from her own negligence. Perhaps McCarthy was present but not responsible, his mental illness making him an easy scapegoat for a more cunning accomplice. Character witnesses testify to McCarthy's gentleness with other children, his periodic lucidity, his vulnerability when not under the influence. They paint a picture of a damaged man who might be many things: addict, mentally ill, unreliable, but not a child killer. Michael loved Bella, testifies Diana McCarthy, his sister. When he was clean, when he was taking his medication, he was wonderful with her. He would never hurt a child. But under cross-examination, even these sympathetic witnesses acknowledge McCarthy's violent episodes, his paranoia, his belief that Bella was somehow supernatural or evil. "Did your brother ever tell you that Bella was possessed?" Prosecutor Pappas asks. Diane McCarthy hesitates. "Sometimes when he was using, he would say strange things, including that Bella was a demon." "Yes," she admits quietly, "but he was sick. He didn't mean it." The defense case creates sympathy for McCarthy without explaining away the central facts. Bella is dead, McCarthy was present when she died, and his own statements to police acknowledge that something was wrong with her that needed to be controlled. Prosecutor John Pappas addresses the jury one final time, his voice carrying the weight of every piece of evidence, every witness, every expert who has testified over weeks of trial. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a 2-year-old child named Bella Bond, who was murdered by a man who called her a demon. The evidence is overwhelming, the testimony is consistent, and the defendant's own words condemn him." He reviews the timeline methodically. McCarthy's escalating paranoia, his statements about Bella being evil, his admission to police that he controlled her when she wouldn't stop crying, the forensic evidence placing her body in their shared home, the weeks of concealment, the careful disposal in Boston Harbor. Rochelle Bond is not on trial here, though she has been judged by every person in this courtroom. Yes, she failed her daughter. Yes, she made terrible choices. But the person who killed Bella Bond is sitting at that defense table, and no amount of blame-shifting changes that fact. Pappas pauses, letting his eyes move across each juror's face. Bella Bond deserves justice, not perfect justice. Nothing can bring her back but human justice. The acknowledgement that her life mattered, that her death was not acceptable, that someone must be held accountable for silencing her voice forever. Defense attorney Shapiro responds with a final plea for reasonable doubt. The prosecution wants you to convict based on emotion, on the tragedy of a dead child, on the natural human desire to blame someone for this terrible loss. But emotion is not evidence, and tragedy is not proof of guilt. He emphasizes the gaps in the case: no eyewitness to the actual killing, no definitive cause of death, no physical evidence of McCarthy's hands on Bella's body, just the word of an admitted liar who has every reason to point blame elsewhere. Michael McCarthy is a sick man, a troubled man, perhaps even a dangerous man under certain circumstances, but sick, troubled, and dangerous are not the same as guilty. The prosecution has not proven beyond reasonable doubt that my client killed Bella Bond. As closing arguments end, the case moves to the jury, 12 strangers who must decide not just McCarthy's fate, but how Bella Bond's story will be remembered, as murder, as tragedy, or as something in between that justice cannot quite reach. The jury room becomes its own small world, where 12 people who were strangers weeks ago must now weigh the life of a man against the death of a child. Foreman Robert Garcia, a machinist with 3 daughters of his own, guides the initial discussion. "Let's start with what we know for certain," he suggests. "Bella Bond is dead. She died in that apartment. Her body was stored and then disposed of in the harbor. Michael McCarthy was present for all of this." Juror #7, Mary Collins, a retired teacher, speaks hesitantly. "The question is whether he killed her or just helped cover it up. And I keep thinking about his mental illness. Can someone that sick really form the intent to murder?" Juror #3, David Wong, shakes his head. "Mental illness doesn't excuse child murder, and his own words to police that something was wrong with Bella, that he controlled her, that sounds like confession to me." The deliberation continues for hours, then days. They review testimony, examine evidence photos, debate the credibility of witnesses. Some jurors cannot get past Rochelle Bond's failures as a mother. Others focus solely on the evidence against McCarthy. "Here's what I keep coming back to," says Juror #9. "Patricia Rivera, that little girl is dead, and someone killed her. Maybe it wasn't premeditated murder, maybe it was a moment of rage or psychosis, but someone stopped that child from breathing. The debate centers on intent versus outcome, mental illness versus moral responsibility, the weight of circumstantial evidence versus the presumption of innocence. But underneath it all is the simple, terrible fact that Bella Bond was alive and then she was dead, and someone in that apartment caused the transition. On the third day of deliberation, they reach a verdict that satisfies no one completely, but represents the best approximation of justice they can achieve: guilty of second-degree murder. Not the premeditated killing the prosecution sought, but not the acquittal the defense hoped for. A recognition that Michael McCarthy killed Bella Bond, but perhaps without the deliberate intent that would justify a life sentence without parole. The courtroom fills once again for the reading of the verdict. Media, family members, advocates, and observers who have followed Bella's story from the beginning pack every available seat. The air feels electric with anticipation and dread. Michael McCarthy shows no visible emotion as the jury foreman stands to deliver their decision. His pale eyes remain fixed on the table in front of him, as detached from this moment as he has been from every other aspect of the proceedings. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of murder in the second degree, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupts in a mixture of relief and frustration. Justice has been served, but not the complete justice that Bella's supporters hoped for. McCarthy will face significant prison time, but not the life sentence without parole that first-degree murder would have brought. Joe Amoroso, Bella's biological father, weeps quietly in the gallery. "She deserved better," he whispers to the victim advocate beside him. "My little girl deserved so much better than this." At sentencing 3 weeks later, Judge Charles Gargiulo addresses McCarthy directly. "Mr. McCarthy, you have been convicted of killing a 2-year-old child, a defenseless little girl who depended on the adults in her life for protection. Instead of protection, she found violence. This court sentences you to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. You will be eligible for parole on your 55th birthday, assuming you demonstrate genuine remorse and rehabilitation." McCarthy shows no reaction to the sentence. He is led away in shackles, disappearing into the prison system that will house him for the next 2 decades. His exit from the courtroom marks the end of the legal proceedings, but not the end of Bella's story. Outside the courthouse, Prosecutor Pappas addresses the media one final time. Today's verdict brings some measure of justice for Bella Bond, but it cannot bring her back. Our hope is that her story will remind us all of our obligation to protect the most vulnerable among us. In a separate proceeding, months earlier, Rachel Bond accepted a plea agreement that reflected both her cooperation with prosecutors and her role in her daughter's death. The courtroom is smaller, the media attention less intense, but the weight of judgment no less severe. "Bond, you have pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact to murder and to welfare fraud," Judge Barbara Collins states. "While you did not kill your daughter, your actions after her death were reprehensible." Rachel stands to address the court, her voice barely above a whisper. "I failed my daughter in every way that mattered. I didn't protect her when she was alive, and I didn't honor her when she was dead. I have to live with that for the rest of my life. I know people think I should go to prison forever, and maybe I should, but I'm asking for the chance to try to make things right, to help other children who might be in danger, to speak up when I should have spoken up before." The judge sentences Rachel to time served plus probation, acknowledging both her cooperation with authorities and the psychological trauma she has endured. The sentence sparks immediate controversy. Many feel she should face harsher punishment for her failure to protect Bella, but Judge Collins explains her reasoning. "Miss Bond's punishment will be living with her choices for the rest of her life. No prison sentence can exceed the guilt and regret she already carries." Rachel walks out of the courthouse, a free woman, but freedom feels like another form of imprisonment. She disappears from public view, leaving behind a legacy of complicated emotions about complicity, responsibility, and the different ways people fail the children they're supposed to protect. The memorial service for Bella Bond takes place on a gray October afternoon at Deer Island, near the spot where Maria Valdez first discovered her small body. Hundreds of people gather, strangers who followed her story, advocates for children's rights, law enforcement officers who worked her case, and family members who knew her too briefly. The shore is covered with flowers, teddy bears, handwritten notes, and photos of Bella smiling. Someone has brought a small acoustic guitar and plays soft children's songs that Bella might have loved. The wind carries the music across the harbor like a lullaby. Reverend David Peters, who has ministered to many grieving families, speaks about the profound impact of Bella's story. This little girl, who lived only 2 years, has touched more lives and changed more hearts than many who live to old age. In death, she has become a voice for every child who cannot speak for themselves. Detective Sarah Mason, who worked Bella's case from the beginning, speaks about the investigation. Bella taught us that every child matters, that no death should go unmarked, that society has an obligation to seek truth and justice, even when it's difficult and painful. Maria Valdez, the woman whose morning jog changed everything, places a single white rose at the water's edge. "I think about her every time I walk this path," she says quietly. "I hope she knows she was found by someone who cared, that she wasn't alone in the end." As the memorial service concludes, people begin to drift away, but many linger by the water. The harbor that once held Bella's small body now holds their grief, their hope, their commitment to remember her name and tell her story. A small plaque is installed near the walking path, reading simply, "In memory of Bella Nevaeh Amoroso Bond, 2013-2015, you are known, you are loved, you are remembered." In the months following McCarthy's conviction, investigators and social workers conduct a thorough review of the systems that should have protected Bella. The findings are troubling but not entirely surprising to those who work in child welfare. Department of Children and Families Director Linda Watson addresses a legislative committee reviewing the case. "Bella Bond was known to our agency. We had interactions with the family, but our assessments concluded that while there were concerns, the threshold for removal had not been met." The review reveals the challenges of protecting children in families with addiction, mental illness, and domestic violence. Social workers carrying impossible caseloads, making life and death decisions with limited information and resources. "The system didn't fail Bella Bond," argues Child advocate Margaret Torres. "The system as currently designed cannot succeed for children like Bella. We ask social workers to predict which families will become dangerous, but we give them neither the tools nor the resources to make accurate assessments." New protocols emerge from Bella's death. Enhanced training for recognizing signs of child endangerment, increased resources for families struggling with addiction, and improved coordination between law enforcement and social services. But those who worked closest to Bella's case know that systemic changes, however necessary, cannot address the fundamental challenge: predicting which troubled families will cross the line from dysfunction to deadly violence. Dr. Elizabeth Carey, the medical examiner who performed Bella's autopsy, reflects on the broader implications. "Every child who dies violently represents a failure of multiple systems: family, community, social services, law enforcement. We can improve all of these systems, but we cannot eliminate the human capacity for terrible choices." Bella's death galvanizes child advocacy efforts across Massachusetts and beyond. The Bella Bond Foundation is established to support families in crisis and improve reporting mechanisms for suspected child abuse. Foundation Director Sandra Martinez, herself a survivor of childhood abuse, explains the organization's mission. "Bella's story shows us what happens when communities fail to act on their suspicions, when fear of being wrong prevents us from speaking up for vulnerable children." The foundation launches awareness campaigns, encouraging neighbors, teachers, and community members to report concerns about child welfare. "It's better to be wrong about suspected abuse than silent about actual abuse," becomes their motto. In Boston's schools, Bella's story becomes part of mandatory training for teachers and staff. Educators learn to recognize signs of neglect, abuse, and family crisis that might have been visible in Bella's short life. Elementary school, Principal Janet Rivera notes the impact. "Teachers tell me they see children differently now, that they're more alert to signs that something might be wrong at home." Bella's death has made us all more vigilant. But advocacy efforts also reveal the complexity of protecting children while preserving family integrity. The balance between intervention and intrusion remains delicate, and Bella's case offers no simple answers to these eternal dilemmas. "We want to save every child like Bella," Martinez acknowledges, "but we also recognize that aggressive intervention can destroy families that might otherwise be healed. The challenge is knowing the difference before it's too late." Deer Island Walking Path remains a place of pilgrimage for those whose lives were touched by her story. The memorial plaque is often decorated with fresh flowers, small toys, and handwritten notes from children asking why some grown-ups hurt babies. Maria Valdez still walks this path most mornings, though the route now carries different meaning. Where once it was solitary exercise, it has become meditation, remembrance, and commitment to awareness. She pauses at the memorial each time, reading new messages and removing items damaged by weather. "Some people ask if I regret finding her," Maria reflects, watching the sun set over Boston Harbor. "But Bella deserved to be found. She deserved to have someone care about what happened to her, even if that someone was a stranger who found her too late." Detective Sarah Mason, now promoted to sergeant, occasionally visits the memorial during her off-duty hours. Bella's case changed how she approaches investigations involving children, making her more persistent, more willing to look beyond surface explanations. Bella taught me that the most vulnerable victims are often the most invisible, Mason says. Children who exist outside normal systems, families that avoid official contact, situations where everyone assumes someone else is paying attention. As darkness falls over the harbor, the lights of Boston flicker to life across the water. Somewhere in the city, other children sleep in situations that range from perfect safety to unthinkable danger. The systems designed to protect them work imperfectly, staffed by humans making difficult decisions with incomplete information. Michael McCarthy serves his sentence in maximum security, his mental illness treated with medications that provide clarity he lacked during Bella's final days. Prison records show no visitor requests, no correspondence, no apparent connection to the world he left behind. Rochelle Bond has disappeared into the anonymity she once craved, her name occasionally surfacing in news reports about child protection policy, but her current whereabouts unknown. The weight of her survival, when her daughter did not survive, remains her private burden, but Bella's memory persists, in ways large and small. Social workers cite her case when requesting additional resources. Teachers think of her when they notice signs of distress in students. Neighbors speak up when they hear sounds that concern them, remembering that silence enabled tragedy. The harbor continues its ancient rhythm, waves washing against the shore in patterns unchanged by human drama. But for those who remember, the water carries more than salt and debris. It carries the echo of a child's voice that was silenced too early, and the commitment to ensure such silence never goes unnoticed again.